This one's working.
It's not working.
It is working.
Oh, good. Great. So just turn it down a bit. Wonderful. That's great. And this one, I suppose this one's a bit difficult.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Play. Play.
So, don't worry.
No, I just turned it on.
Yeah?
No, this one is really...
Yeah. Okay. So let's say into this one. I think this one also records somewhat of the time. That's not the only recording. This one here also records. And maybe when somebody else comes, I'll be able to handle that. So today is Monday night, Kof Gimel, Moitze Kof Gimel Tamuz. Maybe Shmuel knows how to tell me that. We decided we'd learn to get a chavrusa, nobody was there, so. You don't know how to do it? Okay, so leave it. It's not essential. It just adds.
Why?
So it's Monday night, Kof Gimel Tamuz.
Yeah, that's what
Hemshchaim Beis, Amud Tov Tesai. So we learned the Kitzur, and we saw that the kasha was that how is Chochmas Timora, being as it is the union of Kesher Elyon, that's the Gilul Atik, and we saw the Arifas Ayin Benegel there. How can Chochmas Timora, since Pnimis Atik is there, Mamish B'Shlapshers, and that's the union of Kesher Elyon, that we saw that the in a taktoin shebe etem shomanim shekol etem mamet davki in the bechina of chochmas timor, being as it is kil bechina taktoin shebe etem anim shekshama kol etem. We saw that the bechina taktoina was a helem mesuyam, not a helem amiti on the etem inin of the atmas. And so that was the Madrega Amitius of Moichas Timor. We saw that was the union of Shemen Atoiv, and then we saw that was the union of Moya Shemen La Mo or Shelamayla Me'er, what that was Ayin Timor, and all that Ika was in the Mazel of Noit Seir, what that is that's the Mazel Ashayat to Gilui Chochma Pupuya. Over the Mazel Neitzer, that is the Indian of Aiden Timor, that's the macabre of all these madrigas that we just saw. So the question is, how can Moichas Timor and Mazel Neitzer, how can they be a mocker to Chochma Haga Geluya L'Chorat, which is Ein Arech Klar Uklar? So we began by saying that the two madrigas in Chochmas Timor, and we saw that the word Timor is the Shem Ikri of that madriga, meaning that it's a chokhmah which is sosom min hakablim. But b'zeh we saw there are two madrigas. But in the union of stimus, we can describe two madrigas. And we saw there's one which is sosom mitzad makablim, and we saw an interesting diuk there, and a kudas apiyur, that bm is something which is the stimus is beika mitzad makablim, is not necessarily sosum b'etzem amahus. On the contrary, this is oyer hameya begilui. But the makablim are not mitzad the koitza hamusik. And the makablim, they're not able to be makabel that madrega. They're not able to reach that madrega, put it more properly. But since it's really begilui to the makablim, it's just that it's a gilui naila l'mayla mikoich eson, then it could be imagined, and it can come a point where they will be oiler to grasp that particular gilo. Yeah, either mitzad a special schar on the sinus koyach no maila, or mitzad the Indian of zichuk kelim shemitzad mitzad makablim. That eventually the stimulus can come to a form of giloi in the makablim. And therefore he said, "V'yuchal liyos lifrochim b'chinas iskalas hastimulus." Therefore we see the word lifrochim implies that it's not always common, but it can be from time to time. What that indicates that it's begilui to them, and if it's be'er to them, that really is in some form of hamshocha v'gilui. Rak mipnei miut erkom einem yechelum lekaber. Umikom okim harei efes kotzeu niglo lehem. V'yochelove lidei gilui legamrei bahagdolos kli hamakablim. In other words, the Rebbe says that the truth is that that's what we're going to see more as we go along. That the inyan from Chochmas Timur is auch upon him noida metziusei. That's what in one madrega upon him Chochmas Timur, and that's what is the whole beer in Eter at the beginning, the first hemshech of Eter. What the Rebbe is masbir as Chochmas Timur is noida auch upon him metziusei. So that's what the Rebbe is maramis here at the end of this whole piece. That really there is continuously a efes kotzeu of gilui to the makablim. Efes kotzeu means like an extreme outward touch of gilui, but upon him they are aware of this madrega, and it is begilui to them in their clay awareness, in the clay of the Kliyah Kabbalah. It's noido lehem ba'ivin klolim ba'ivin ha-metzius bilvad, not ba'ivin ha-mahus klal, and b'zeh gufen, and even from yediyas ha-shlila ulai. But auch upon him it is noido lehem. And therefore, since it's noido lehem, then you can grow in that oifen ha-yediyah. Through the zichuk and the kelim, there can be a higher gilui through the fact that the kelim become more. And that's what we often find in siddhas, that the mila of Yediyas Ashlila is that implies a inyan of heder kli. The higher that the kli is prepared to overlook its own gather of metzias, and the kli itself becomes, as you might call, ois kli, no longer insisting on the metzias of kli, that leads to, as what you might call bittul of the whole metzias of the kli. And therefore he's able to mikabel inyanim, which the yeshus or metzias of the kli at the beginning somewhat denied him. When he becomes more heder kli, he loses the whole inyan of what kli is in himself. Even though he remains a kli, then he's able to be makabel inyanim, which are at the beginning only a idea of efes katzeu, in a way of a closer, until he's able to understand it's mavur over there in Eter, that he can even understand the oifen havdola of this madrega. He can even appreciate just the way it is modofron and how much the oid protim ke'ela in the etzem oifen of the yediyah. So that's what the Rebbe said. Nimtzal afizeh, that really sosum mitzad makablim is really begolui, and it's really a form of gilui. It's just lamaila from the yechelis of the kelim. But alidei zichur kelim bi'ikar, or alidei oid inyanim bezeh, then it's possible to rise up and gain a further hakora pnimius in the steamers of the mashpia. The Beis, however, the other form of steamers, kasher b'chinas steamers, imitzad atzmei davke, v'loy lemekablim levad, ela mitzad atzmei shehu b'chinas helem v'astimus, shezeu anikra helem ha atzmi. This is where we got last week. This is where we're touching on briefly last week. Here we now understand what is this bitu, which is motzei moed in the lashonos of Tzedus, particularly from the Machaber, the Rebbe Nishma Seiden, this drushim, oid drushim, helem ha'atzmi. So what is the pshat helem ha'atzmi? when the Helem is mitzad the etzem of the etzem. Not that it's only mitzad the choisa erech of the makablim. No, this is a Helem which, as you might say, he is in that. He's to blame for the Helem because he is be'emes mitzad the maila of the atzmi be'helem mehem. And that's a Helem what the Lashon occurs here, that lo yovel lidei gilu li'olam. In other words, that's not going to come li'olam lidei gilu. So when we say li'olam, we have to mean, kol zman, that the Seder will be the Seder how it is. Or if there'll be, essential changes in the whole set of Kamoi, for example, is Galas Melech HaMashiach, or Oid Inyonim B'zeh, Oid Sochos Ot Inyom B'chiyas Amazing V'chayitza B'zeh, then even that Muftachani will come Lidei Giloi. But mitzad the inin, how it is now in the Seder of the Inyonim, then Le'olam Lo Yovid Lidei Giloi, because that's mitzad the etzem himself. He is hiding himself. In other words, he's hidden in mitzad his own self, what he is really, be'emes, and that's called the Helem ha'atzmi, the Helem mitzad the etzem. The steamus mitzad the makablim is not like that. The steamus mitzad the makablim is really Ayin shel Gilui klapei him. It's just that it's too high for them. It's kilo calling to them a tremendous challenge to elevate themselves, like Gabi said. And the far, that's only a Helem which really is mitzad the miud yechilas of the makablim, but not in the atzmi. He himself is already there begolo. And korazman, but even Tamuz, there's a certain gila of efes katzeho of that madrega in the actual yediyah ha-makablim. And therefore that's what we call it, yediyah ha-metzias, but even rochik, even though it's not yediyah ha-mahuskal. V'hainu sha'ha'er bi'etzem hu lamayla megeder gilui. B'zeh lo yesh chiluchi madreges. Remember, there's no level where you can say efes kotzehu or not efes kotzehu, or that a certain aspect can be miskala to the makabel and a certain aspect not. No, over there it's only one inyan, the etzem steamus of the etzem in his own self. What you might call a edge of an edge is not going to come into Gilui. And that's what we said, Al Chaponim, the way the Seder HaOlam are now, and the Seder HaMakablim, I feel with all the milas of the Makablim, they're not going to be able to be massive of that particular inyan. So as a sort of shaila, it'll say, what do we need that level for if it's never really going to be be'ezishu Gilui to the Makablim? So maybe if we're patient and we go a little bit further in this drush, then it's possible we'll be able to answer that. Because even though it's never going to be yediyas ha-makablim mitzad der yechilas aus makablim, but it's impossible to say that ein lahem kol nafkamina b'zeh. Cholila to say a thing like that. And then we're going to see that there's a certain oifa in what we call the functioning of the makifim, which we're going to start talking about now, that even though it won't be Ayin shel Gilui, but it'll be Ayin from pi'ula rechoike bohem al choponim. Ayin from pi'ulas bittul bohem or inyonim adoimim, and we're going to see that's got to do with the shchacha de sukkah. The shchacha de sukkah is a makif, a very special type of makif. So let's be patient. We'll put that shaila for the time being a little bit on hold. If it's never going to come liday yediyas ha-makablim bo even gilui b'derech harogi lohem my inyone lohem, and why do we need to know about it? We're putting that one, as it were, on hold for the time being, because say yevua or al choponim yeturatz behem shechadvarim.
It's a level leading to lower levels. It's a level leading to lower levels.
No. He said it's inyan from Helem ha'atzmi. He said lo yovel lidei gilui li'olam. It's not leading to lower levels. No, that's a sosum inside the very essence of the etzem himself. And so it's not going to lead afterwards to other madrigas. The first madrega, yeah, the first madrega, you're right. That'll lead to other madregas eventually. But this one, no. And therefore, that's why I'm asking. On that basis, my nafkamina legabeinu, if it's completely social from the makablim le'olam. So we'll see about that as we go along. Because it was a nafkamina, but it's a tifa inyan, which will become clear from a certain inyan, and then we'll find that in the Bosi Lagani there's also a whole remez lazeh. And we'll come Beis Hashem to that as we go along. So here begins a fascinating inyan, ubiyo inyan, diyadua, dehina yadua, masha kosu bazeya, parsha truma, dof kuf kof zayin. There's a famous passage brought in numerous places in Siddur and in the Sifrei HaKabbalah. Be'inyan samach umem da afar samein. Now, the word afar samein is called sometimes in the Zohar Kodesh afar samein yadakya, the very delicate or pure afar samein. Now, the afar samein is a name of a small fruit that used to grow. I don't know if it still does. I'm not sufficiently informed in all the details, and I'm not a botanist, so I can't really go into it very much. But there was a certain little delicate fruit. It's not to be confused with what they call nowadays an afas. Not to be confused with that at all, because that's just a combination of a couple of fruits. And some people said it's not good for the stomach, so we won't go into that. But the afas was a very delicate, and it gave off a very beautiful oil. The Shemen afas is also brought in Sifrei HaKabbalah, and it was apparently a absolutely amazing oil with this unbelievable reach. They said if you smelt the reach, the Shemen afas it would have on you all amazing hashpoyas, and it was also like a segula for all sorts of amazing healing effects, hashpoyas tevas. But that's the sinyan of the afas hamoin. So according to the Zohar Kodesh, this afas hamoin, being a very rare and beautiful and pure fruit with this unbelievable oil and everything in him, indicates a very, very high madrega. And if we look at it carefully, if you take the word afas hamoin and you take out the mem and the samech, then you're left with afroin, afron or efrayon, if you put a yud in. And Ephrayon is also a name, meaning like how they call it a heichal, a beautiful place, or even like a heichal, or a thing that they used to carry kings in, even like a thing they would carry him around, but it was like a beautiful covered thing that he would travel in. That's called Ephrayon. Or it can even mean a little palace where he dwells, or things of that nature. So the word Ephrayon is itself a word, and if you put in the afas hamoin, you put in the samach with the mem, then you get this idea of afas hamoin. So it's muvura in certain drushim, and it'll become a bit clear here also in this Hampshire that those are two madregas what are called bina v'malchus. In other words, that the afas hamoin with the two letters mem and samach, that's a very high madrega, which is called bina. In most of the Sifrei Kabbalah, it's brought down afas hamoin represents the madrega bina. Now, bina is a very high inyan in the sense that there's a gilu in bina of keser, kiyadua, in a very high way, which means that there are certain inyanim nirmozim in bina, which have in themselves milas even over the inyan from chokhmah. Because in Bina it comes all in the form of a harchovas hagilo. In Chokhmah everything's hidden and in the form of nakuda. In Bina, therefore Bina draws from a certain gilo of keseh in a high oifen and in a high madrega. So generally speaking, that's what they say, that this is afas hamoin, and it indicates the gilu in Gan Eden. In this passage of the Zohar, Ayin talks about the inyan from Gan Eden, and in Gan Eden Gufa it talks about madregas, Eden stimua, something similar to what we just mentioned. Ayin of a very high madrega, and the kuda of Gan Eden is bina. Gan Eden is bina, and particularly Gan Eden ha'elyon is bina on a very high madrega. Bina ha'atzmam, pnimis bina. So we see that in order to get to that level, we put in a samach and and a mem. So that's what's written in the Zohar. Shmamish that it's written at the word Ephroion. So Ephroion is taken as being the spirit of Malchus, because a king, with his palace and his heichal and all those those are the milas, the spirits of Malchus. And this Indian of Hasimuin indicates the milas in Bina, which allow it to have some sort of ultimate ashpur through the midas into Ephraim, which is Malchus. That's just a brief background. Now, in the Zohar, if you look over there, it's mashma, even though in the word of Hasimuin, the way you write it, you don't have to write it with a mem stuma. You can write it with an ordinary mem, a mem pesucha. But it's much more the way the Zohar draws out the picture of the two letters, the samach and the mem, that the mem is a mem stuma. In other words, it's like a schloss mem, a soft mem. He's closed from all sides, but he's squarish. Whereas the open mem does have a little bit of a pasicha in it. So even though it doesn't necessarily appear that you have to say that you insist on that mem being a mem stuma, but that's the way the Zohar tends to assume that we're hinting at. And he says that both of them are closed, but there's a hefresh b'neiah. The mem astimo, the mem, meaning the mem sofi, astima shaloi, he biribua. It's in a squared form. V'ainu shemem yesh lo yachiza v'shashvas b'pnimiyas. That this mem of the Hasimuin, it's got some form of a hishashvas legabi pnimiyas. Because if you take the mem sofi, he sits on the ground. He sits and he's got square sides to him, or wherever you've got points or corners or sittingness, then you tend to indicate a certain settlement into kelim, albeit beyond to a certain extent, but nonetheless shaykhs elakate. So we're going to see that the mem sosum, his Indian is lamaila mi kelim, albeit, but nonetheless with a certain natir to the kelim. In other words, he's a makif, but he's a makif korev ma'id, and he has certain relations to the pnimi. Ve'ilo a samach is a circle. A samach is mamish a circle. Therefore, a samach is a makif which doesn't have any achiza in the pnimi. He's beyond any direct relation to the pnimi. V'samach, hu be'igu, ainu she'en lo yachiza v'shashvas klal. He doesn't have any hold or shashvas in the say the pnimi at all. Obezoyach chelik alef daf hey omet alef isa, that igula v'ribua del gav. Over there the Zohar says that you've got a circle, but inside the circle you can draw a square. Have you ever seen a square inside a circle? He touches the circle, but he doesn't touch him at all points. He only touches him on the four corners of himself, but he doesn't. So the Rebbe said that we're going to learn that that's a reference to these two oisias. In other words, that the samach and the mem do have a certain interrelationship amongst themselves, in that the mem finds himself inside the samach. In other words, that even the samach is not completely and utterly legamrei muvdal, but he's muvdal enough not to be any hishashvas. Mashing the mem is only the beginning of hishashvas. But they have a certain interkesha in that the ribua is dilgov. He's from the inside. The Kosuv Hamikdash Melech, he's the famous Pirush on the Zohar. Shezeh Inyan Igulim ve Yoisher. That is the two inyanim of the Makifim and the Pnimi. Yoisher is straight, the one on that inyan of the Pnimi. So the Yoisher is nimshat from the Makif of the eagle which surrounds him. It's just that he comes down in the form of a tzimtzum al deravid kav. But the kav is nimshat from the eagle, as is well known. V'yesh leima the inin igula v'ribua. Yes, the Rebbe. That's what the Mikdash Melech says by from Klali. We should suggest now in a more protestic way. Hu bechinas oer machif toer in seishel ifnei tzimtzum. Maybe we could say that these two madregas represent the immediate Indian of Makif, and the emes Indian of Makif is the Urshel of Nea Tzimtzum, because the whole Urshel of Nea Tzimtzum, B'kol HaMadrega Shaboy, has a Makif L'gabi Seidah Hishtalsel. So he said, "V'hu b'chinas ha'igel ha'godel shelifnei ha'kav." Yeah, that's the first thing. The igel hagodel, or that's the Indian of the circle which was left by the Tzimtzum Harishain, that the Tzimtzum withdrew the Ur, and there was the whole Ur Makif remained around the Cholol in the form of a circle, and we'll soon mention that again in a minute. The igel hagodel shelifnei ha'kav, u'b'chinas Ur ha'malbish sha'acha ha'Tzimtzum, shegam zeh hu b'chinas makif. Here we made up with an expression that the Rebbe doesn't go into a piyur, but that's a lesson what occurs in some of the Mekubalim, particularly in the Sefer Emek HaMelech. It's brought down that he uses that expression a lot. And the Emek HaMelech was from the Talmudi Arizal, and he wrote this great work, which is piyurim on different madregas in the Kabbalah, called the Emek HaMelech. And there was a
from the Ramah?
No. The Ramak was just before the Arizal. The Emek HaMelech was another generation after the Arizal.
So that's the Hilul of the Ramah.
Today's man, Kof Gimel Tamuz. What were you, man? No, I just remembered. Shuf. That's very interesting. Isn't that amazing? Because I looked up a beer on that Indian of the Afasimai in a sefer which I have from the Ramak in my office. And he brings down that the clothes on Madrega, the Afasimai is Bina, I would say. And it's in Bina Gufa, different Madregas. It's the Atzus of Pinimis of Bina, which is Makabo Mash from Kesed. I say, Shaf to Ramak. And I must looked up a sefer. And it's even more, I just happened to pass through the introduction to the Sefer, and in the introduction they bring a whole series of sections from the life story of the Ramah. They mention certain things there about his greatness and this. And it's brought down in a Maya from the Rebbe, which I had to look up for another Indian. And the Rebbe, it's Mamash Apilet. The Rebbe Rashab brings down over there that the Ramak didn't talk about the Tzimtzum. We don't find in the Kisvei HaRamak any mention of the Tzimtzum, even though he's Maramas maybe to certain Inyanim, but he doesn't talk openly about the Tzimtzum. It's only the Arizal who talks about it. But even the Arizal writes about it, Bekitzer Lefiera. And the immediate appeal on the Indian of Tzimtzum is the emphasis on Chovas Kol Indian, the ganze Inyanim is Taki in Tzimtzum, the whole Indian of the Tzimtzum. Therefore, Rabbi once said to me, he said, it's only Chassidim, Chassidim Chabad, was they weisen the Geudel Erech HaPnimi von dem Inyan HaTzimtzum. That's what Rabbi said. And when it's written over there, that the Ramak, in that Maimah, that's often the Rabbi Shabbat looked up another Maimah, and it's written over there, Sha'aramak lo yidiber me'inyan HaTzimtzum. Just in helping myself get ready for this year, I saw the Ramak about 3 or 4 times. And I actually looked up in a sefer, which is a likud from his Sfarim. What did it say to that? Philip Floyd. Now you remind me that I remember now it's Kof Gimel Tamuz. That's his. That's the Hilul of the. I don't know. Oh, how funny, amazing. Shkoyach for reminding me about that. So anyway, so the Indian from the Era Malbish, that's in the Emek HaMelech. Now the Emek HaMelech is not the Ramak. He's about 2 generations after the Ramak. He uses the expression Oyer HaMalbish Sha'acha HaTzimtzum. Now what does he mean by the word Oyer HaMalbish? The Oyer Lifnei HaTzimtzum, even the lower madregas in the, as much as we can use such an expression, lower madregas, in the Oyer Sha'after HaTzimtzum, it's impossible to say that is any yachas of a lavush or a dova ha-malbish. Malbish means that you make yourself a lavush over something. Ani malbish something means that I put on a lavush over it. So here, this oil becomes like it makes itself into a lavush over other hinyanim. So you can only say malbish is like the causator. So you can only say that about an oil which has got some form of a yachas. To the whole side of Ishtaushalas. But the Elif Tzimtzum is so completely mudal from Seder Shtalshel. Even when we talk about the preparing itself for Ezer Shoev, the feels like but according to the Ayin Beis, even in the Eretz of it's impossible to say that they really have any yachas to the whole Seder of Shtalshel, I feel But when I say Oyer HaMalbish, that I mean an oil which is going to literally make itself into a lavush, it's going to be higher than the oilamas, but it's going to become like a lavush over there. Now, a lavush is a davar makif alecha. Your lavush covers you around, but it's close to you, which means that it has all sorts of inside effects on you, and from there there'll be a possibility for that to be already the beginning of the Seder HaPnim. So therefore we're going to see that what it appears that the Emek HaMelech, when he says the Ur HaMalbish, he really means Ak. Because Ak is a dover kloli al kol Seder Shtalshel, and it's called a Malbish because it makes itself a lavush, and from that lavush is Nimshach, B'derech Tzimtzum, Ak, and so on and so forth, or the Inyanim and the Kudim and Toyo and Achilas. So that's what we mean by the word Oyer HaMalbish. Oyer HaMalbish, Achat Tzimtzum, Shegam Zehu B'chinas Machiv. That's also a Machiv. Like we said, Ach is Machiv al Kol Seder HaYishtalshel. B'derech Klau Hu Inyan B'chinas Tihiru Iloah V'Tihiru Tatoah. What's well known in the Zohar, in the famous passage at the beginning of the Zohar, what he talks over there about Tihiru Iloah, Tihiru Tatoah. Tihiru is the word shining light. The word Tihiru means like the Tzor Ayin. The how do you call it, of the at the middle of the day is called Tihiru, the bright light. So in that Gufi you got two madrigas, Tihiru Iloah and Tihiru Tatoah. Now Tihiru Iloah is the Eretz Lefnei Tzimtzum. It's already a light, it's already got a shaychus to something, but in a way which is Iloah, moved up. Tihiru Tatoah means it's still a bright light, it's still a very powerful and intense light, but it's Tatoah. It's already got some beginning of a yachas to what is say the Hishtalshel. So that'll be very good. That the samach is going to be there how he is lifnei tzimtzum adayin lo shachas legamri lo ilamas, even though Ezer Shoev shel shachas he's got, but he's mudal legamri mitzad yosei mamish lifnei tzimtzum. And then we're going to see that even lifnei tzimtzum there was the inyan of where the first tzimtzum occurred in the oil, but that's already a ger of Oyer HaMalbish, even though it's not the mamish emes inyan of Oyer HaMalbish, but we can call Oyer HaMalbish because it's the beginning before the tzimtzum for the Oyer HaMalbish. And so he said, B'klolos, that's the inyan of Tihiru Iloah, Tihiru Tatoah. The Tihiru Iloah, u'b'chinas ha'igul ha'godol shel lifnei tzimtzum. U'b'chinas Tihiru Tatoah, hu Oyer HaMalbish. But there are prat, b'chinas Tihiru Tatoah, zeu b'chinas Ak. If we talk more, even though Ak is not prat, Ak is a kloli l'kol ha'olam kula. But what we mean, der prat, meaning more towards talking after the tzimtzum. The Tihiru Iloah is good of the tzimtzum, is still a madrega muvdela, a more b'derech kilu relationship to the whole Seder Shtalshel than we call Tihiru Tatoah Ak. Is he said, Gam b'chinas HaMalbish, Gam kein b'klau b'chinas Tihiru Tatoah. He said the which is already shy to be a lavush over the elamas and to be machiv like by him, mamish. Well, that's also b'klau b'chinas Tihiru Tatoah. So in the Yosef now tzimtzum it'll be just mamish the terem inyan tzimtzum, and after the tzimtzum it'll be the inyan of Ak. That's Oyer HaMalbish. Isha be'Emek HaMelech Shah Beis Perek Beis. Well, here we meet the Sefer Emek HaMelech himself. The HaMalbish Hu HaMeruba. In other words, the Malbish is what he called the square. In other words, he's that eagle, he's that, how do you call it, Ribua Shebetecha eagle that we saw in the Zohar. In other words, that since he's already Malbish, he's already a lavush to the elements, well, that means he's got corners literally, he's already got some form of shaychus to the element. Ubi'et Chaim Isa. Here we come now to the Arizal. So we've been through in the order which maybe have a shayach to the Ramak, but even closely we mentioned the Afhasamoin. Now we've been through the Talmidim of the Arizal, which is the Emek HaMelech. Now we come to the Arizal himself. The Isa Ubayit Chaim Isa, the Tzimtzum Arishon, Shu Benekuda Em Tsoyes, the Erin Say Baruchu, Shanase Cholo, Umokim Ponui. Er een seif makifi mekol tzad, hu b'chinasa igul davke. Yeah, that's what's written in the Sefer Emek Hamelech. He says, "V'chein hu b'eitzas chayim." Now, eitzas chayim, well, that's like a series of Hagahos which were written, I think, maybe by a slightly later Talmud. Maybe they were written by the Maram Paparish, but he was a very close Talmud of the Arizal. Or he was very close. I think he was even Mamish a Talmud of the Arizal, the Maram Paparish, and he was the one who wrote the famous Sefer, the Meyorei Oyer, which he brought down. It's like a little dictionary in Kabbalah, which was brought down by the Rebbeim all over the place. And he wrote another Sefer, which I have, and maddeningly enough, I can't find it. I have the Sefer, and I saw it mentioned a few weeks ago in a certain thing, and I wanted to look it back. And I just, I was had to go tearing at my hair that I couldn't find it. I know I've got it, but I just couldn't find it. Anyway, back to our theme. That's the Eitzos Chayim. Now the Eitzos Chayim, he's got a few Hagahos on this whole Indian of the Tzimtzum, which is mentioned in the Eitz Chayim. But he also writes Bekitzer Lafia. It's not a big arichas, but he does write certain things about the Indian of the Tzimtzum. So he points out that the Indian of the Tzimtzum Arishain is a circle. In other words, it's written in the Eitz Chaim that Kaviyot began with an Akuda Emtsoiyas, and then the Oyer, which was Mamar Kol HaCholol, withdrew in the form of a circle. Have you got the idea? He said, "V'chein hu be'Eitz Chaim u'b'movei shiorim." Now the movei shiorim, that's one of the Shmoina Shorim of the Rizal, which was written by the Rabbeinu Chaim Vital. So, I mean, we're meeting up with everybody here. I mean, the Eitz Chaim is also written by the Rabbeinu Chaim Vital, the truth is. But these are the 8 gateways which were written by the Rabbeinu Chaim Vital. One's called Movei Shiorim, but it's like a biur, ba'irach, on different themes which occur in the Eitz Chaim. He's mavuat hatam al zeh. He's mavaya why it is that the Tzimtzum Arishain had to withdraw in the form of a circle. And as I remember, unfortunately I was just too busy that I couldn't get to my cover. I do happen to know where it is, but I just couldn't get to it. I was in a hurry to get to this Kinnoth, which I saw had a very high priority. I wanted very much to be there. I couldn't actually get to the passage, but I've seen it once before. So what he wants to say, it's like we're pointing out here. Had the oil withdrawn in the Tzimtzum Arishan, but even that it would have been with square lines or corners or things of that nature, then that would have implied a certain ishyashvas, a certain yachas of that oil to what was inside the cholol. Have you got the idea? In other words, it would have been a certain yachas. What we want to say is that oil is in a form of withdrawal completely, in that everything is equally bottle it, and there's literally a mokum pono. If a emerson musik of a mokum pono, meaning that nothing inside the ego can really be compared with the ego, and the ego is withdrawn from them completely and utterly, as if he had squares to him that he didn't withdraw. He withdrew from some points more than others. That's the point of the Movei Shorim Bekitzer. It's really quite a relatively understandable view. That's why the Tzimtzum Arishan, the withdrawal of the Era Amiti, the Era Maki, was circular. That's the time which is Mavui in the Movei Shorim. Yesh Loima, Shezeh Inyan, Mem, V'Samach. These two inyanim that we've seen here, the inyan of the Era Malbish, and the inyan of it being Ribua, and the inyan of the Tzimtzum Arishan, the Igu Hagodol Shelifnei Akav, withdrawing in the form of a circle, then we can say that these are the two inyanim of the Mem and the Samach. The HaMalbish, or the which is later close to becoming a lavush over the Eilemes, Ubchinas Mem Stuma, Liyesh Yeshezeo Acha HaTzimtzum. Since we're learning Be'ika, the Pshat, that this Malbish, which is Ak, and Ak is after the Tzimtzum, Harizeh Bchinas Shaychus Elo Eilemes V'Ishtalsos. It's really quite a verstandig inner. It's all the details one has to keep, you have to keep up. והאיגו הגודל שלפני הצמצום, הרי זה בחינת סמ"ק. והיינו, שמובדל בערך מבחינת ההשתלשלות שלו. In other words, that indicates that it's all the histalshelus are bottled in exactly the same way for Lagabi Zeh. Well, even though to a certain extent that's true Lagabi Ak also, but not in an absolute way. In other words, the higher you are in the Seder, the histalshelus or Elamus, then you have a certain kiruv to Ak. Yeah, of inside the ego, inside that hollow, left that no madrega has any real kiruv to or measurable kiruv to the oil shehistala. Shemul be'erev b'mchinas ha'ishtalshelus v'hinei ma she'amal bishu maruba. Now here's another flow that we get from the Eimach HaMelech. Isa be'Eimach HaMelech. Well, it's interesting. There were certain great authorities that they wanted to throw something about the Sefer Eimach HaMelech. Well, it was really from the Mechaber. It's claimed to be, and maybe it was just somebody who wrote a few things. So some people, for some reason, they wanted to be mistapek about the Sefer Eimach HaMelech, but we see from our Rebbeim that they build on him very much. And I saw it written once, I forget where, a brief discussion about it, and we see that our Rebbeim relied tremendously on the Eimach HaMelech. Meruba isa be'Eimach HaMelech hatam al zeh shezeh inyan daled oisius havaya shenase mehem adaled shemes ab sag ma and ban ve'im kein tzarich loima debchinas igu harizel amayla mishem havaya.
What's the Arba Oisius?
The Arba Oisius of the Shem Havaya.
What is the Meruba?
The Ur Malbish, but that's the inyan of the Meruba. So Meruba's got four sides to it. So that's the Arba Oisius of the Shem Havaya. Now we're going to see that Oisius play an important part in this whole argument, because later we're going to see that we can talk about our Shem Havaya even in Mamish in the Atzmas almost, in what we call the Yechilas of the Atzmas, and there we're going to say that there's no Oisius, that that's just purely the Etzem Yechilas of the Atzmas to give forth certain inyonim mi Atzmai. When you say Oisius, then you mean a certain symptom, but they're gilui to Makabim. So there was the Arba lines of the Ribua are the Arba Oisius of the Shem Havaya, and he said that they give rise to these Arba Shemes, Ab, Sag, Ma, Uban. What Ab is the Indian of Ak, this is one on Ab Shem Abishai to Ak. Sag is the Indian of Olam HaToyu, or also Koil, a little bit of Olam HaNikudim, and Ma is the Indian of Atzilus, and Ban is Malchus to Atzilus, so it becomes Orishai to a Mokir or Al Chaponim Malchus Labiyah. And they are different, what do you call them, Tzirufim of the Shem Havaya. That the Indian from Ab is the Tziruf of the Shem Havaya b'milui Oisia, milui Yuden, Sag is b'milui Hayen, and Ma is b'milui Alephan, and Ban is also b'milui Hayen. The difference between Ma and Ban, between Sag and Ban, is that there's a Vav in the middle, and therefore there's a difference of 6 in the number there. That in the milui Hayen of the Harikot of the Shem Sag, we also include a Vav in there. We count in a Vav, or we count in Aleph together with the Hay, and we get an extra 6 in the Milui of the Sag. Mashinkin in Ban. No, we talk about the Yud the Shem Havaya b'Milui Hay. In other words, Yud, Vav, Dalad, Hey, and then Vav, and then Hey again. So what we do with the Shem Sag, then it's in the middle it's Vav, Aleph, Vav, or something like that. Vav, Aleph, Vav. And in the Shem Ban, then it's just Vav without the Aleph, Vav, or something like that. It's a slight difference. And therefore you get an extra 6 in the number. Or what am I saying? Not 6, extra 11. I'm sorry. And therefore you write Vov, Aleph Vov, is then you get, and then Hey or something. It's altogether you get a 5 and a 6 is 11. You get an extra. If we sit down with the paper, I could reckon it all out for you. Once you start reckoning, yeah, it comes. In the Shemban, you don't have the extra 11. Yeah, because why? Because that's just purely the inner from Malchus. So therefore, it's all just Hayin in the. It's adequate. Shemavai Behayin Pshutim, as they state in Malta Russian, because the whole inner Malchus is Hay. Yeah, the inner from blowing over into the coming entity. Ashikin Sag is an inner which is withdrawn. And remember, those are the Daled Tzirufim of the Shem Havaya. So the point of the Emek HaMelech is not just oisius of the Shem Havaya, but the different ways that they're mitztarev together to give rise to the whole inyan of Seder Hishtalshos. His point being that in those Daled oisius, how they are in their first shoulders, now Tzimtzum, you've already got a iskalus and a readiness to give forth all the different madregas which lead up to the coming elements, and including through Ban already the inyan of the Briim, the Nivroim Yesh Mi'ayin and elements be Biakas one on that's the Ike inyan of Ban. V'im came, tzarek loima, de beginas igu, harizela maila mishem avaya. Olafize, yesh loima, Beis ha-beginas, de mem musamach, beginas igula v'ribua, gam be'er ish lifnei. Because we've been talking the whole time now that the ribua was the inyan from Titura Tatua Achre. So the Rebbe, we could say Lafize, if we're talking about the inyan of how they're called in the Shem Havaya, and it's well known that there's an inyan for Shem Havaya lifnei tzimtzum gam. We can say that both of these madregas are also lifnei tzimtzum. Lav dafka one lifnei and one le'achrei. Tehine mavua. So now we go on a long beer to show that there's a inyan of Shem Havaya lifnei tzimtzum. In order to put right the Emek HaMelech, that he can be talking completely lifnei tzimtzum, or partially lifnei and partially le'achrei. And here there's going to be a chiddush that even lifnei tzimtzum are already nirmozim all these inyanim of ab sag ma'u uban, that even there will be a certain inyan of their inyan, even koydem tzimtzum. Tehine mavur b'mokim acher b'inyan ad sheloi nivra ha'olam hoya hu shmei bil v'od. Now this is a famous statement of the Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, or it's in Perek, I've forgotten which Perek it is, in the Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, and it's brought down in Ribui Makarim Exodus, that he says that until the world was not created, then there was only the Eibishter and his name. The Eibishter was there with his name. So the fact that the whole chiddush of that statement on the part of the Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer is not to tell me that who. I mean that's more that the Eibishter who levad before there was any nivro elam, that there was who levad. That's not the chiddush. The chiddush is that he wants to tell me that there was also shmoi, which means that we must be talking about it's our inyan, which is kolol in the Eibishter in such a way that it can be described as actually nivro oilam. But even though there wasn't yet any creation, we hadn't come that far, there's still an inyan which would be called shmoi. And the word shmoi implies that somebody has to call him by his name. The whole inyan of Hashem is only for the sake or meaning to imply makablim. So here we see that there's kilo what you might call in that mind of the period of the Rebbe is hidden a mashmoyes, that there's a certain hint at makablim even before there were any makablim b'poil, and that's his chiddush. That's what he's trying to say, Rabbi Eliezer, that even before the inyan. So how do we touch normally? And the Rebbe just assumes here that you realize that that's the pshat, because we've gone up now lifnei tzimtzum. Ad sheloi nivro ha'olam means until the tzimtzum harishon. That's how we touch it in many places. Because once you got the tzimtzum harishon, then you, how do you say you've already gone the whole way? Once you've got the tzimtzum harishon, you're already on the way to the elements. It's only just a question of going through the works. Once you got to the tzimtzum. Before you got to the tzimtzum, you haven't started any works yet. So says the Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, you didn't start any of the works, but you've already got a point where the works are already being somehow or another hinted at, or they've been somehow or another in a very delicate way, oile b'machshavte, beisish oifen. So therefore, said the Rebbe, imkein, the Shem zeh hu Shem ha'vaya. That hu shmoi, shmoi l'chera means shmoi ha'atzmi, and that's Shem ha'vaya. Imkein hari yesh Shem ha'vaya gam be'erin sheish lifnei ha'tzimtzum. Rach shezo b'chinas ish pastus ha'er. Hina yedua de be'erin sheish lifnei im yesh te klolos ha'er b'chinas ha'akol b'atzmusai. Why? The Indian Atzimtzum, Ushi Yes Galas Kaviach Chutz Atzmus. The Kedem Atzimtzum Akol who Kol Biatzmus, Moishkos Mochimache, Mikol Mochim, but there are Prat, Yesh Beze Madreges, Yesh Beze Madreges. Uprinas is Pashtus or Uprinas Etzemoyer. Now, here we're talking about the oil. When we say here oil, we mean the oil which was already in a form of Gilover is Pashtus. In other words, when we say, the Arizal says at the beginning that Terem Shenivru and V'netzlu Kol Ha'elamus Yehoya Oyer Poshut HaMamalas Kol HaMatzias. So that Oyer Poshut, well, that's the oil which has been meir from the Atzmas, but it's been meir from the Atzmas. It's in a form of Giluv Amshocher. Yeah? And that's the famous question, what did you need that for? But anyway, that's another shayla, but Al Kaponim we did, we want to gather that oil. So in that oil gufa there are two madregas. That's what's called the etzema oil, but that's l'mayla from any real implication of gilui to any makablim yet. So that asks itself even more the question, what do we really need that for? And it takes us back to what we asked earlier in the Hemshah. And then there's what's called in that gufa the pashtas of that oil, but that's already beginning somehow or another to talk about the future inyan of the makablim, to be maramis to them, but hakol b'toicha atzmusay, and there's the famous piyur there that it's like somebody thinks inside himself purely for the sake of himself, but he's beginning to think about another entity, but he's only thinking about it entirely within himself, not really concerning any relation to that entity, but nonetheless he does consider that there is such a thing as another entity. And so therefore that's the union of these pashtus are here. So the Shem Havaya is nimtza kolol b'toich atzmusei adayin amnam, aber it's in the union of these pashtus of the lo in the etzema oyer. So he said that is pashtus oyer, that's called atzilus teklolos, hu Shem Havaya. That's the union of the Shem Havaya, how it is hu shmei bilvad. Now that's not posterior to what you might find in other places. Well, I'm not going into that now, but in other places you might find that it's written that the union of the shmoi bilvad is in the etzemoyer, not in these pastures. As he stated in Tzadikei and other hemshechim of what you might call the more orthodox beer, and the more sort of usual beer is this one here. But sometimes we talk even higher. But there's going to be a hint at that also as we go along, that you can talk about the Shem Havaya kimat on all levels. But to talk about it as a Shem already, in the form of a certain Galus, a voices, that's, as it were, more easy or makubal in the how he is between his pashtas, not in the etzema. Good, so we'll hold there for the time being. And Shem should hope that it should be that the gil of all these madregas, even when etzema and his pashtas and the etzem kol b'teicha etzem, and the etzem mamish, the atzmus mamish. So we was galileh lamata, and we heard from Shmuel Baruch Hashem that it was a big hatzlacha. I was at the beginning. There were a few people, a crowd of people. When I was leaving, the whole group of guys came. Just I was about to leave, they came. A whole group of guys came in, and I left at about 1:30. And so it was a positive turn.
A lot of highs.
Yeah, a lot of positivity. And he told me this morning that they got a very interesting that he and a few of these guys asked, what should they do about the whole situation? I mentioned the tree. And they got this answer where the Rebbe said that he's very happy to hear about the hemshech of the pe'ilos. Hemshech, that's the ikit to be mamshech. For our pe'ilos, does. Yeah, and then the Rebbe said that he was very particularly pleased to hear about the Yemei Ha'iyun that they've been organized. So they came to this, to the organizing this Yom So, well, Hashem, we're associated with the whole mudslinging and the whole, I must admit, it gave me a lot of chayas myself, because I've just been so terribly hurt by this whole business. Mostly for Matis, the same. Probably Piamenta. Was he there with Piamenta?
And he came later on.
Yeah. He's very supportive, but he'll pick it all up, he'll pick it together. And I must say that when I got to even the small amount of people that were there, I felt immediately that there was a positivity. And Simone looked perfectly fine. He looked okay. He didn't look at all broken. He just saying, further with, Hafotza Sagir.
His son Chaim told me that on Shabbos, Rabbi Yokovich spoke about other Rabbi who should be Moisef in Sifat.
Oh yeah, Rabbi Yokovich. Because very interesting. Tuvia called Yokovich and asked him, what does he say? He just said, Sarachmanas of all these guys, He said, let's stop talking about them, let's get going. That's what Yokovich said. So, Baruch Hashem, at least if somebody would, Baruch Hashem, got a bit of say, to put it nicely. Listen, Tuvia told me that he called up you and said, what's going on? Tell me, what do we do? So let's go ahead. Keep going ahead. And he said, that's what he said to Tuvia.